Welcome to the Roundtable, a conversation from Lakeside Church.
Well, welcome back to the Roundtable, friends. Good to be back with you. We were off last week, and now there are only three of us. Jeff is on COVID vacation. What do you think he's doing?
Oh, yeah. Is there any question?
Tending his lawn.
Golfing.
Golfing, all things that involve grass.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyways, so Jeff's not here today. What's that?
Working on that tan.
Yes. Well, we are back, and hey, since the last time I got a haircut, Daniel, let's see yours. Ooh. Robyn, what's your story?
Monday.
Are you doing it?
Yep, Monday.
Okay.
Same style as us?
Same place? You going to the cigar shop too?
Yeah.
Trifina got her eyebrows done.
Awesome. I'll have to find out where she goes in Guelph.
Well, you know what? The next day she got a message that the eyebrow place shut down because they realized that they can't actually do it. So Tri's like, I'm so glad I got it done. So, yeah, no dice. I'm back on eyebrow duty.
She's trusting you?
No.
After what you did.
Yeah. Well, we're in episode 10 of the Roundtable. If you listen to episode 3, you'll hear that story. But let's get going. I mean, hey, we got something new happening this week. Forget about haircuts. We're going to all be back in the same building on Sunday, not as a congregation, but at least as the team that's leading, we're going to live stream from the building this weekend. Are you guys excited about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. You know what's nice is my week no longer requires me to sit and delete photos for half an hour so I can film on my iPhone.
That's the worst.
It was like the kiss of death when you're like filming and then all of a sudden it's like out of storage. And I'm like, the worst.
And I can edit Saturday night.
Yes!
I know.
You edit. I'm going to write my sermon Saturday night. We call that the Saturday night special.
I'm not that good.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it's going to be great. I'm excited. And then in the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about how do we begin as a community to gather. And we've started the brainstorming after that in the last few weeks. And so I'm really excited for what that'll look like, just to be able to see each other again. And it's been an interesting season. So, but enough about that. Episode 10, we are discussing, in fact, all the questions that came in today related to Robyn's message. So clearly it was not clear, Robyn. And, but it's okay. Daniel and I are here to mentor you. Don't worry. But no, why don't you give us a quick summary? I actually thought it was a fantastic message, and I thought it just, it appetized so many thoughts in my mind, and it seems like our congregants as well. It's like, wow, if this is true, then what about, and what about? So why don't you give us a quick summary of what you spoke on this weekend? And if you haven't listened to it, you can go on our podcast or our YouTube channel, go to our website. It's available in so many places, but you really got to listen to the message. So Robyn, give us a quick summary.
Basically, I just looked at the symbolism of the table, the power of the table. It's the symbol actually that Jesus chose, communion, bread and wine, to represent himself. And it was the primary sort of symbol in the early church. When churches eventually started being built, the table was front and center, not the pulpit, not anything else. It was the table. So it was a very powerful symbol. And really it represented, it was socially disruptive. It was economically daring. It was politically unorthodox. It upturned the entire culture and society of the day. So when you came around that table, you knew that you belonged, you had a place, it was inclusive, and everybody was on a level playing field. Yeah.
Love it.
Basically the summary that I spent hundreds of hours working on.
So good.
Summarize it. Right.
Yeah, I love that we're going to jump into those 3 statements. So here we go. You guys ready for some questions? All right. So this is the first one. This is referring to something that you talked about in the message. If the cross wasn't the symbol that Jesus or even the early church chose, because Robyn, you told us that the cross didn't come into existence as a symbol until, was it the 7th century?
Yeah, I mean, there was inklings of it before that, but the 7th century was,
Okay. So how did we end up, so this is the person's question, so how did we end up with it as our primary symbol for Christianity? So Robyn, why don't you give us a little history lesson?
Well, it'll be a little history lesson, not comprehensive. But as I said, there was inklings of it, right? So in the 2nd century, they were already starting to mark people's foreheads with the cross when they were being confirmed. In the 3rd century, a guy by the name of Clement referred to it as the Lord's sign. By the 4th century, when Constantine came along, now you'll remember probably that he went into battle. And in one of these very memorable battles, he claims to have seen a vision. It was a vision of a cross and the words, "conquer by this sign." And he took that to mean that he was legitimized in his battles. And so from then on, he had a cross emblazoned on the standards of his army. And so that was in the 4th century, and it really accelerated the embrace of the cross as a Christian symbol. To me, I cringe when I think that it was accelerated in military, that when people saw the cross, it represented Christ and violence. And for me, it's just cringeworthy. And so the cross became widely known across the Roman Empire as representing Christians and representing violence. And either it wasn't, I've pondered this because there's a lot of debate about that vision and what he actually saw and did he see it and was he actually converted? And I'm thinking, either the vision wasn't from God and it was just the onions he ate the night before, or it was a vision from God and he totally misunderstood the message. Conquer by this cross. And what does the cross represent?
Oh,
Self-sacrifice. It represents dying for others, not killing others, right? It represents submission and self-giving. And he totally hijacked it for his own military purposes. And then, from there it accelerated. And then we see in the 7th century, it became really locked in as probably the primary symbol of Christianity. It's interesting. One of the well-known Christian scholars and historians has said this, John Stott. Everybody knows about John Stott. Yeah. This is what he said about it. Christians wanted to commemorate as central to their understanding of Jesus, neither his birth, nor his teaching, neither his his service, which is his ministry, neither his resurrection, nor his reign. Nor his reign, not even the kingdom of God. No, they wanted to commemorate his death. I just think, man, you missed most of the story. So that probably doesn't impact the entire why, but it's sort of a little journey as to how it became front and central.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because it becomes a narrow-minded view of the life of Jesus down to just his death. I love one author, he called it vampire Christians. We're just focused on his blood, right? And is that valuable? Of course, but that story of Christianity doesn't require the life of Jesus. It doesn't require the resurrection. It doesn't require his kingship, which we're going to spend the whole summer talking about, which I'm so excited. But
or the Spirit, right? The giving of the Spirit, which Jesus said, this is better. This is better than me being here.
Yeah.
And we missed that.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. So then with that, here's the follow-up question. Are you saying, I love this. Are you saying, Robyn, that we should tear down all of the crosses from all of the buildings and remove them from our sanctuaries?
Want me to answer that?
I don't know. Dan, you want to jump on that?
Sure. I totally think it depends on what the cross means to us. We've all heard many discussions, as Robyn, you mentioned in your message, about symbols that are negative that people have turned to good and are now like, actually, no, that's negative. Let's tear it down. But when you see the cross, you see this idea of that what it was initially intended, this idea of representing Christ and his sacrifice and all that sort of thing. I think that we can redeem it instead of just tossing it out. Sort of take this perspective of let's use the cross what it's intended to be used to represent, and that is the sacrifice of Christ. But with that being said, I often wondered, when I was 16, I got a cross tattooed on my arm because it's easier than tattooing an open tomb. So I always thought that why do we always use the cross and not the resurrection and not the other things? And I think what if the question I always wonder is why is it only the cross, right? Why can't we celebrate the other things?
And I think that's the piece that gets to me. I think you're right. It depends. I'm definitely not protesting, get rid of these symbols. They came in the wrong way. Don't you know the history? No. The scriptures even talk about the cross. Like it's a part of our faith. But there's so much more. And I think there's a part of, maybe even as evangelicals, we're so scared of symbolism, because I grew up and it's like, there, you don't worship idols. And so the Christian brothers and sisters who have maybe a statue or images in their buildings, they've got it wrong. And that's idol worship. And we don't want to have it. I don't know if you guys ever heard anything like that, but it was like this fear of imagery. And I get the fear of worshiping imagery, but imagery is so powerful. It's the reason why Jesus, and I feel like half the time he's talking in word pictures. He's wanting people to imagine something in their minds. And yet the moment we put on a canvas, it's like, no, that's imagery. That's idol worship. You don't want anything to do with that. But there is something so powerful about imagery, about seeing things visually, that I think we miss out when we only narrowly focus on one image.
Yeah. Have you ever been in an Eastern Orthodox church and seen, it's like, they're beautiful. And I can't help but, in a sense, not worship the artwork, but see the images of God and the ideas of his narrative, and just really gain a sense of his presence. And I think, part of our stream and background of churches is this idea of denial of art and beauty, because we fear, like you said, the idolatry, imagery, and those sort of things. But one of the reasons I love our downtown building, and many people do, is just the beauty of the imagery and art in there. I mean, the stained glass windows tell the story of the gospel. And what a beautiful thing for the illiterate, or for those who don't know it. You can just walk through the room and say, okay, so someone special was born. He did some crazy things, and look, he rose from the grave. Well, that's pretty cool. And then the room is also full of Christian symbols that represent different things. And I just think there's such a beauty to that, in our story and our history, and just affirming the truth that we believe. It's pretty cool.
And a graven image is very different than a symbol, right? There's a huge misunderstanding around that. But I just think we are material beings, and God knows that. He created us that way. And symbols are one way we engage with the story in a very powerful, emotive level, instead of just the cerebral belief system. It touches us somewhere deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? Oh, sorry. One more thing.
Ahead.
What comes to my mind is think about the detailed description for building the tabernacle and the temple, and the beauty in which God created things. And I think some of the symbols that we are able to use to even minutely point to his grandness are a beautiful thing to have.
Well, I mean, and even we'll get back to communion in a second, but there's a reason why Jesus didn't say, hey, whenever you have some time, just close your eyes and just remember what I did. He grabbed physical things. There's something as human beings that physical things help us remember. It's the reason why we have memory boxes. We go back and we don't worship them. They just help us remember our childhood, our baby's first steps. There's something really powerful about that. So let me jump on this question. So why should the table be such a key symbol? I mean, we don't really have an image of a table at the top of our church buildings, but why should it be so key?
I think especially when we think of what the table represented in the first century in the Middle East, right? And still actually to this day, when you were invited, particularly in that context of Jewish followers of God and non-Jewish people, they couldn't eat together because of their religious laws. And when Jesus brought everybody around the table, and later Paul says, there's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither male nor female, there's neither slave nor free. Once you come to that table, the playing field is leveled. When you sit at a table in the Middle East, and you're invited to eat, it's like you have been included into the home. You belong. You have a place. You will be defended. You will be fed. It's a place of inclusion and belonging. And I just think in a culture, particularly now, that's so individual, that's so isolated, where loneliness is an epidemic, everybody wants and needs a place of belonging. And we have that. We have the table as a symbol of that belonging, of economic equality. Everybody's eating from the same loaf. And that's why Paul was so livid in the Corinthian church, because they weren't all eating from the same loaf, right? There was this hierarchical structure. So yeah, I just think the table is beautiful. I think it needs to be recovered. The power of it needs to be recovered.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Robyn. When I was house hunting, I remember we saw some houses that when we walked in, realized didn't have a dining room or a place to have enough space for people to sit at the table with you. Even one of our houses didn't have enough space for having people over. And I remember just being so grieved. I'm like, we need a table. We need a table to have meals with. There's something so important about that, right? Like, we don't want to have people over just to sit around and be entertained by the TV, but we want to actually engage face to face. Like, I love what you said earlier about leveling the playing field and becoming, equal at the table, kids, adults, neighbors, everyone. It's so beautiful. And it kind of gets me wondering that as we're moving towards, getting back together, having different people in our homes and that sort of thing, as restrictions are starting to loosen, I just kind of want to put the question out to our listeners is, who are you inviting to the table that you haven't before? I think now is a time where there's a unique opportunity to remove some of that awkwardness of having people over at the table once things begin to loosen up.
Yeah. The thing I wonder if now for some people have been alone in their homes taking communion. And so not being together has been really hard. We're together in spirit, but not physically together. So I know they're so excited to do that. But I do wonder if there are families or roommates that have been taking it together, serving each other, looking each other in the eyes, maybe taking time to pray with each other as our different pastors have led it through the screen. I wonder if now coming back and maybe even having a real loaf and a big glass, and drinking fully, and reminding ourselves that the grace of God is free flowing, not just a little thimble. I wonder if they're going to come back, and as someone passes a plate, maybe doesn't even make eye contact, and you're given this like moment with you and God. And I wonder if people are going to not protest, but just be like, I feel like there's more to this meal that I've experienced, and this doesn't satisfy. I don't know if anyone else is going to feel that way.
Maybe we should talk about that another time.
Well, I'll put that on our staff meeting question, but it's true, right? Like it's actually a communal meal. And I'm looking forward to the different ways that we can explore. There's no one way to do it, but I think we can get creative. So, all right, ready to switch gears a little bit? Because while it was about the table, it was about what it represented. And so I love this person. They just quoted your lines, Robyn, and they just said, what could socially disruptive, economically daring, and politically unorthodox look like today?
Well, it's actually pretty interesting that we're having this conversation today. Today is the 155th anniversary of the founding of the Salvation Army. And one of the founders, Catherine, it was Catherine and William Booth, husband and wife. They looked around at their society, recognized the church was not meeting the needs of the people in the society. And if you know the Salvation Army now, you know that wherever there's disaster, catastrophe, or need, that's where the Salvation Army will be. And Catherine Booth said this, she said, to better the future, we must disturb the present. And I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds like Jesus. But they caused so many disturbances. And here's the thing, they were criticized by the church. Their methods were criticized by other Christians because they weren't doing it. They weren't doing church the way, you're supposed to do church. They were theologically disruptive. At the time, women weren't allowed to preach. She preached her heart out. She stood by her husband, and the two of them saw souls come to know Jesus. They were socially and politically disruptive. They exposed the sex trafficking that was going on, that was sort of hidden, nobody talked about. They exposed that. They campaigned Parliament to put in protections for the young and vulnerable women. They were economically disruptive. They campaigned Parliament. They protested and asked for changes for workers in the factories. As a matter of fact, there was this one matchstick factory, and the workers it was dangerous. And so not only did they protest and campaign and ask for changes, but then they decided, you know what, we're just going to start our own factory. They just started their own factory, and they put the workers first. Like, it was the best place to work. Wow. It was socially disruptive. They just did all that kind of stuff. And I just think, yeah, they they just got right in there, rolled up their sleeves, got dirty, and did what needed to be done. And I just thought it was such a beautiful picture. Not only did they campaign with their voice, but they acted. And I believe their actions actually came before their voice.
I love that. And I think one of the lost arts that I'm reminded of often by my father-in-law is to read the biographies of Christians from the past in history. Because, you know, as you read that and you share that, it kind of opens up our inspirations. Oh, and I wonder if this could mean this for today. And so in my in-laws' basement, there's literally bookshelves of Christian biographies. And one of the stories that I've heard is someone who was economically daring was Guinness. So we all know of Guinness, the beer company, but most people don't know how it started. But it was actually started by a Christian who was just have you heard? Yeah, ready for this? Ready for this? Yeah, prepare yourself. I feel like we're going to be having an interesting roundtable next week. But right, he was just like, he wasn't happy with the drunkenness and what it was doing to society. So he decided to create such a heavy beer that would taste delicious, but it would be so heavy that you couldn't drink so much of it and you couldn't get drunk off it. And that's where we got Guinness beer. What a creative businessman. I have friends who are economically daring. I know one who's a business owner. And when he was young and just starting out his business, he actually sat down with his spouse and they set a ceiling on how much they would ever take as a salary from their business. And they would be generous with the rest, not having a clue how successful they would be as business owners. But that was economically daring. They're like, you know what? This is what we need to live on. No more than that. And, you know, most people, their status of living continues to rise as their income rises. But like as Jesus followers, that's not what we're called to. That was economically daring. I think of another friend of mine who's in the rental home business. And we know rental house business can be kind of a shisty place. And he is constantly, whenever I'm talking to him, he's like, yeah, we just lowered the rent again. He's just trying to make it so that he can provide great homes and they do great work on the houses, but then also not, you know, taking so much from people that they can't actually be in a rental space and saving up to buy their own house. But that's one of the things that he's just really sought to do and care for people and young families, and often taking the people that most landlords don't want anything to do with. So I just think that there's someone who's just looking at their finances and not just thinking bigger, better, faster, cheaper, but how do I honor God with my finances, with my business? I love that kind of stuff. And I think we need to, as Jesus followers, be asking those kind of questions.
Do you know what's so beautiful about the Guinness story that just strikes me is that, and maybe it's just, you know, the Christian culture I grew up in, the reaction I would think from most Christians would be to wag your fingers and tell those people just quit drinking. Like, quit drinking, you're getting drunk. Instead, they took something that was inherently creating destruction in the society and redeemed it in a way, right? Like what a thought that you could redeem. Well, if we could redeem a pint of beer, nothing's beyond redemption. I just think that's so cool. I
already tweeted it. Robyn, if we can redeem a pint of beer out of context, perfect.
But really, right? I mean, we're used to wagging our fingers and saying don't instead of, I don't know, engaging the culture and saying, how can we take what seems to be so prolific and enjoyed by the culture and redeem it? And I just think that takes incredible creativity and daring and risk.
Yeah. Daniel, thoughts?
Yeah, so I've been kind of wrestling with this question in my mind for the past couple months, just with, the state of our world, right? The state of the economy, the political world, the social world right now. And I can't help but wonder as Christians, have we gotten behind in this actually? As some people would say, we live in a post-Christian culture, but that means that our culture has been shaped deeply by Christian values. And so when I see this sense of people fighting for the rights of others and lives and caring for the poor and all that kind of stuff, and I think for the church, I see a lot of non-Jesus people actually living out what Jesus would call us to do. And so for us to be super disruptive and, countercultural or whatever you want to call it, it might not be that good in a sense. And so I kind of wonder, how do we honor what our culture is doing in a positive way, yet carry that forwards in even greater ways? Like, let's stop worrying so much about our internal little strifes that we have in a church, and actually see some of the needs in our world and actually work with the world to make it better. That's why I love our fifth core value and how we talk about, everyone can change the world and the future of the church is beyond our walls. I just worry sometimes when we think, how are we going to live so differently than the world, when the world has actually been shaped by the church more than we think.
So Daniel, what I'm hearing you say is that there are things that we may be called to do as Jesus followers that people who aren't Jesus followers may already have on their radar as valuable. And 100 years from now, we may have been the only people that were fighting for that. And right now, in this cultural moment, there may be things that non-Jesus people actually have a better understanding of what Jesus stood for and are fighting for. And maybe Christians, in jumping into that, it wouldn't feel socially disruptive. Like the non-Christian would be like, what? How dare you stand for that? It's actually like, no, that one, and I was tangent maybe, but as I'm preparing for this message this weekend, as we start this new series, I have this line, which is Jesus clashed with everyone at some point. At some points, people were perfectly in line with Jesus, and then he would say something, and some people would be like, that's no problem with us, and other people would be like, I'm leaving now. That depending on who we are, there are certain things that will jive and not jive. So that's a really interesting thought.
Mm-hmm. I think we have catching up to do, Daniel. That's a fabulous. Absolutely. We have now fallen behind the culture in so many areas.
Wow. Okay.
And with that being said, though, there's some areas where I think we are still, it's not like, I'm not trying to say the church has just lost the plot and it's just, we're garbage. But rather when we look at society as behind, I don't know if that's the case anymore.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Let's go. Are we ready for the last question? It's a long one.
All right.
Here we go. Robyn's message was great. It is. This is the question. Not that I didn't think it was great. Okay. Focus, Marc. Robyn's message was great. It is obvious to most that the church today represents, this is their thoughts, represents the exact opposite of all the things that she mentioned the table represents. Instead of radical inclusivity, we are characterized by who we exclude. Instead of our radical generosity, we're seen as hoarders of wealth in our giant buildings. And instead of being separate from or at odds with the politics of the land, we're tightly intermingled with it. What would it look like if we were as radical within our culture as the early church was in theirs? So what would it look, I think just bottom line their question, a lot of those things we've already touched on. What would it look like if we were as radical within our culture as the early church was in theirs? It would be wild, but I think this is what we'd have to recapture. We'd have to stop looking to Christian leaders to give us the answer. We'd have to stop thinking those 3 or 4 people in the round table will now tell us what socially disruptive looks like and what I need to do and the 3 easy steps to becoming a socially disruptive Christian or the 12-chapter book on being politically, we have to get rid of that and realize that the early church was continuously gathering around the teaching of Jesus, around the breaking of bread, bringing themselves to this sacrificial table, understanding who Jesus is, and to prayer. That they were daily, each individual, listening to the Spirit of God and discovering what that looked like for them. And until this is my thoughts, until we personally accept the fact that every single one of us is called to listen to the voice of God and be obedient to it, we will not become the radical movement that we are called to be. But if we do get that, if we get beyond, I'm waiting for the pastor to tell me what to do, and we all acknowledge that the Spirit of God speaks to us and leads and guides us, watch out, because then we will be what Jesus calls us to be.
I think of just a simple, very private, personal, example of that is, I tended to vote. I grew up in a home that voted for the person or party that would meet our needs. So we look at the platform and we go, yep, we're in this particular class. and this tax structure is going to benefit us for this or that and the other, or they stand for this moral value or this economic position. And I just know without question that we've voted for how it would benefit us, not how it would benefit perhaps the marginalized or someone in a different class. It just didn't even cross our mind. It just didn't even cross our mind. And I think that's one area where every single one of us has a vote. So we could actually look at platforms and vote radically, and it might actually cost us. Like, for us to have voted differently meant that it may not go as well for us as we would have liked, but it may have lifted someone else up from where they were. And so I just think, well, that's one area where we all can look at that every time there's an election, right? Prayerfully consider what, not that any one party represents Jesus, but, in our particular region or city, or I know it'll come to it as a shock to many, but just, what does it look like to vote for the other, with the other's interest in mind, right?
And how Jesus-like is that, right? To put this, like, sacrifice your own, whatever word you want to use, benefit for others. It's just beautiful. Yeah, Marc, I just reminded what you guys were both saying, the Acts chapter 2, the gathered apostles teaching, breaking of bread, fellowship, and prayer. And the idea of the sense of community, the sense of sacrifice and generosity. And I love that idea of, let's just get out there and pray, God, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for us? How are we going to live this out? How are we going to be, in a sense, radically different? Because here's the thing. If we're going to be radical, a lot of those radical and different things are things we haven't thought of yet. Things we can't think of, things that God has yet to show us. And so what if we just prayed, Spirit, lead us and guide us into things that have yet to be done? Imagine what that could lead us to.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. Wow. Well, guys, another great conversation, and maybe more conversation to be had. But friends, as you're listening, can I just encourage you? We want to be this kind of church, and that's not going to happen because we gave you 3 easy steps. It's going to happen when all of us takes time to bring ourselves face to face with Jesus. I just encourage you to be reading the Gospels. We're going to spend the summer there and listening to the voice of God, inviting him to speak into how you do everything, including your money and your voting, apparently, as we've talked about today, which sometimes are taboo topics to talk about, but we let him be king in all those areas. So thanks for joining us again for another episode of the Roundtable. Want to invite you to continue to send your questions in, and don't even just send questions about, what was preached on that week or what's happening in the world that week. Feel free to respond to some of the things we talk about and say, hey, you guys said this, but I'm not sure I agreed, or what about that? We'd love to keep the conversation going week to week. So please feel free. We realize these are kind of sound bites, but we would love to continue that dialogue. So thanks again, friends. From my home to yours, have a great week. Bye for now.